Unless you've been vacationing off-world for the last decade, you're probably aware that there's still nothing that sets the pop-cultural tongues wagging like anything having to do with race. There isn't a single corner of the popular culture that isn't touched by the tensions of racial animus, and really there shouldn't be. Humanity's stubborn, latent tribalism is at the core of just about every aspect of our society, and to ignore it is to ignore reality itself. In my little corner of the world, race issues these days tend to center around issues of movie casting. Remember the insanity that surrounded Donald Glover joking about playing Spider-Man or Idris Elba being in Thor? Well, that cuts in the other direction too. While it hasn't been as big of a blow-up, a lot of people are unhappy about Ben Affleck, who couldn't be whiter if you rolled him in minute rice, playing a character in Argo who was of Latino descent in real life. Ideally, I shouldn't have to explain why these two things are different, but as noted before, I don't live in an ideal world. I live in this world. And the fact is, in this world, white actors playing characters of different races is a thorny issue because A, it means the denial of work to non-white actors for whom choice roles are hard enough to come by unless your name is Will Smith, Denzel Washington, or you're willing to debase yourself in a Tyler Perry production, and B, it calls to mind the ugly, deplorable history of blackface performances in early Hollywood. In other words, it's completely understandable why quote-unquote race-bending by white actors is reflexively seen in a negative light, because overall, it is a negative thing. However, this brings me to two of my favorite ironclad axioms of criticism in life in general. Number one, there is an exception for every rule. Number two, context is everything. Case in point, the movie currently causing the biggest and most heated race-related argument in popular culture, Cloud Atlas. Since this isn't the place for a detailed summary, please note that I reviewed the film right here. Suffice it to say, Cloud Atlas is a film about the subtle threads that connect human beings across vast expanses of time, and the central conceit of which is that it features a small group of main actors playing multiple roles in 6 different time periods using elaborate special effects makeup to let them change their age, race, and even gender as each role demands. So already the basic premise should offer a clue as to why throwing any charges of patriarchal privilege or even outright racism against this particular film is almost absurdly ironic. The entire point of the film and its boundary-flouting casting choices are to highlight the very arbitrary nature of ethnic divides and gender roles. It's worth noting, after all, that the production and release of the film coincided with the public coming out of its co-director Lana Wachowski, a transgendered woman of the directing duo formerly known as the Wachowski brothers. The problem that the film ran into was that only one of the most extreme yet visible makeup transformations to feature prominently in the trailers and advertisements, likely because it comes from the most action-heavy of the 6 stories, featured white actor Jim Sturgis as an Asian man in 22nd century South Korea, which for many raised the old specter of yellowface casting of yesteryear, both in pseudo-serious instances like Charlie Chan or Mickey Rooney's infamous turn in Breakfast at Tiffany's. Compounding matters was the unfortunate coincidence that Sturgis had also appeared in the forgotten dud 21, which was based on a true story involving a group of Asian students but reworked the characters into Caucasians for the film. Not the same precise thing, granted, but the juxtaposition was unfortunate. Now, the most obvious counter-argument against the knee-jerk yellowface accusations were that Sturgis' character isn't a caricature, and that while it's true that letting him play the part means an actual Asian actor didn't get to, the film also gives white roles to Halle Berry and Doona Bai, though granted, there's absolutely zero historical stigma to be applied there, so it's not exactly a balance. No, the real reason I'm willing to say that axiom number 1 applies here, i.e. that Cloud Atlas is an exception to the rule that using white actors to play non-white parts is ill-advised, precisely because of axiom number 2. Context is everything. The context in this case being that Jim Sturgis, to use the most immediate example, is not simply playing an Asian character in the film. See, the story of Cloud Atlas deals directly with reincarnation and the transmigration of souls, while the theme of the film is the recurring cycles of similar ideas, philosophies, goods, evils, and types of people throughout history. The specific reincarnation plot is visualized via a birthmark worn by one character in each story, but the bigger theme is visualized by having the actors play multiple parts but always be recognizable as themselves. That's why you can pretty much always tell who is who even through the makeup. The movie wants you to. In the earliest of the film's 6 time periods, Halle Berry appears as a slave. In the furthest into the future of the 6 periods, she's the emissary of a dark-skinned superior race regarded as something like an angel by a tribe of mostly white primitives. That's supposed to trigger a think about that moment in your subconscious. When 1800s Irish-American Hugo Weaving makes an impassioned defense of slavery using the same dialogue that 22nd century Korean Hugo Weaving used to justify treating artificially fabricated humans as cattle, the juxtaposition is supposed to say something. Now, in the case of Jim Sturgis, his 1800s character is a white lawyer who has an epiphany about the evils of slavery and ultimately becomes an abolitionist alongside his wife, an Irish-American woman played by Doona Bai in Caucasian makeup, while his 22nd century Korean persona is a freedom fighter who becomes the love interest and protector of an enslaved fabricant played by Doona Bai, looking more or less like herself. These two sets of characters could have been played by different actors easily, but then the stories would only be sort of vaguely similar. By using the race-shifting makeup, the film drives home a symbolic parallel. The spirit spirit of 1800 Jim Sturgis abolitionism lives on in Korean Jim Sturgis' revolution in the future. None of this is to suggest, just to be clear, that simply being a good movie or having good intentions can excuse ugly or insensitive things like racist casting choices. Not at all. But context is important, and it's deeply ironic and deeply depressing that a movie that was designed down to its bones to decry things like racism and unwarranted privilege is being raked over the coals for accusations of the same because that context is being ignored. I'm Bob, and that's the big picture.